Tonight's Daily Digit, this is a ridiculous number. $450 million, as in $450 million in emergency aid for Egypt. That's the latest round of cash the White House told Congress it's sending to our frenemy. That's on top of the $4.8 billion loan the IMF already promised to Egypt. Loan, like it's ever going to be repaid back. And who do you think is paying the biggest chunk of that? We are. The U.S., like the UN, is the largest contributor of the IMF. So kiss your hard-earned dollars goodbye. Now, first it was the banks, then the auto industry. Now Obama has bailout fever. The governor of his home state of Illinois is suggesting that the federal government may have to bail out the state's underfunded public sector pension program. This is exactly what happens when politicians and unions get together. It always ends with red ink and programs we never should have promised in the first place. Then there is big government health care. Now, I'm trying not to laugh. This next idea comes from right here in New York State. Today's New York Post reports that Governor Cuomo's administration is launching an aggressive plan to sign up thousands of ex-convicts for taxpayer-financed Medicaid, which they'll receive once they leave prison. This is how it would reportedly work. All the inmates would automatically apply for the public insurance while they're imprisoned. If they meet certain income requirements, they'll be placed on Medicaid once they've served their time and released. Critics say the plan offers no incentive for convicted felons to find work. Really? You think? Tell me how a convicted felon makes an income in prison. Actually, don't tell me. I don't want to know. I'm not surprised the idea originated with Governor Andrew Cuomo. Remember him? He was the guy with absolutely no prior experience who was put in charge of HUD during the Clinton administration. The same man behind the plan that caused the Fannie and Freddie-backed housing bubbles. So, free state health care for prisoners on the inside, now the outside. We should all be treated like guests at the Gray Bar Hotel. Now, back with me from Charlottesville, Virginia, is former OMB director under Ronald Reagan, Jim Miller, and the president of Citizens Against Government Waste, Tom Schatz, joining me from Washington, D.C. Thanks, guys, for sticking with me. One of the things, and I did it in the monologue, and you guys touched on it a little bit during the first segment, was this concept of tax jurisdiction versus taxation without representation. For the longest time, because of the partner programs, people don't really wrap their heads around the fact that when they get money from the next level of government up, somebody outside that jurisdiction has to pay for it. And if they do get their heads wrapped around it, then they make the same demands, and everybody's running up the flagpole trying to get more funding, and now we're seeing all of this good time spending coming to an end. Jim, how can a nation maintain itself, sustain itself, and not end up like Europe if we continue to allow this out-of-jurisdiction spending to continue?
We can't. I mean, it's a run to the lowest common denominator. Every state in the union wants the federal government to cover its pension liabilities. And Senator Mentz should be commended for what he has proposed, and that is to stop everything in the Senate along these lines. But my concern here is above that, and that is the President of the United States could take some of this stimulus money and do it unilaterally, in a sense, by executive order. And Maryland has already used something over $100 million of stimulus money to plug holes in its pension program. So you just can't continue. I don't understand why people don't understand it can't go on.
Now, Tom, usually when states go running to the federal government, the claim is for roads or something that they could try to classify under a federal purpose. But a state-based pension program has nothing to do with the federal government. And what Pat Quinn is actually asking for is the federal government to buy state-issued bonds. What is the difference between QE3 or QE Forever and the Federal Reserve being asked to buy these bonds? It would be a state-based quantitative easing program. Am I right?
That's a good analogy. In fact, it is something that has never been done before. There are federal programs where some states get more money than others, you know, the donee states and the donor states. And I know Jim's very familiar with this from his days at OMB, probably had states screaming at him most of the time. But at least that's based on formulas that Congress has adopted. This would be really ridiculous. Which state will get more and which pension was worse, and it provides zero incentive for any state to try to do a better job of controlling pension costs if they know the feds are going to bail them out.
Now, Jim, again, we look lovingly back at the Reagan administration. I mean, I was a little kid, but, my father thought Ronald Reagan could do no wrong. At the same time, I don't want to say the Reagan era of conservatism is over, but it certainly feels like it. We hear a lot of Republicans that will say things that are akin to saying, well, it's not the spending that's the problem, it's who's doing the spending. It's not the size of the government, it's who's running it. I think we should be all clear and aware that it's the size of government and the out-of-control spending, not who's doing it, not which political party, not which level, that governments have bit off more than they can chew.
I agree with that, and I agree with your assessment that it's just very bad that people are saying, oh, well, it's no longer, we're past Reagan, it's post-Reagan. No, the Reagan principles endure forever. And the Reagan principles are that you should constrain your spending, you should make sure that you're spending on things that are worthwhile.
Yeah, like to act like adults, right?
Act like adults, yeah.
Well, Tom, we're going to wrap up here, I think. When you have politicians negotiating with unions, and in the end, they're really on the same side of the table. It's a trade. You give me support, I get you what you want. It starts at the local level, it goes to the county level, it goes to the state level. It's like an avalanche. There's no stopping it at that point, and nobody's going to give up what they think is theirs, whether it's a public sector worker, a union organizer, or a politician. No, like I said to you on the radio today, no one snowflake blames itself for the avalanche.
Well, that's true. That's why governors like Chris Christie and John Kasich and Scott Walker and, again, a number of Democrats have also come in and said, enough is enough. We're going to address current employees and future employees. The current retirees are a different issue, but we can at least start making people contribute more, as gets done in the private sector, and try to bring something closer to private sector compensation. We have a new report on this. Public employee compensation versus private sector. In some cases, like architects and engineers, public employees get paid 40% more for doing exactly the same job, and that needs to stop.